Hi guys. So, Tom Rolt. The only way I could go about modelling this engine was with a Shapeways print. I will say, as far as Shapeways models go, this is particularly well detailed and thought out. As you'll see later, it fits to the chassis so well. It comes with a few key parts: the main body, smokebox door, roof, cylinder block, and pony truck. It seems pretty accurate to be fair, but I have a feeling this particular engine has good reference drawings available to work from. I opted to have this printed in ultra frosted detail, as I don't buy much from Shapeways, and as there'll be limited stock running on the layout, I thought I'd try and get the best for it. That being said, this build did not go as planned, and I ended up having not one but two replacement bodies sent over, but more on that later. The donor chassis is the ultra reliable N-gauge Bachmann Percy from the Thomas range. This is the same chassis as used under No. 6 Douglas a few weeks back. To prepare the chassis for modifications, I drop out the wheel sets and couplings. In fact, these couplings won't be used anyway, and the rear pivot hole will be used for the eventual pony truck. The cylinder heads need to come off as well, but this was actually more difficult than I was expecting. I thought by removing the screws they would just pop off, but it appears that they have a drop of glue in the centre, so it's lucky I wasn't going to reuse them. The wheels will be used, so these and any screws need to be kept safe for later. A quick test fit of the new piece and you can see just how well this was designed. It's a perfectly tight fit. And with the body on top, the proportions look spot on for this loco. I know that there was an old white metal scratch aid kit a few years back, but that seemed a little bit too long. The issue spotted with, well, let's call this Tom Rolt 1, was that the tank side seems distorted, and the model as a whole did seem a little soft. I'm sure that won't be an issue during the next couple of days. To try and combat the bend in tank sides, I cut a strip of plasticard matching the internal dimensions and then cut little pieces to act as supports. Prior to sending, I sprayed the whole model in primer to get a good idea of what sort of finish I was dealing with, as it's quite hard to see in a translucent form. And instantly you can see how horrid the sides are. I kept thinking that 3D printing within large companies such as Shapeways, with the products costing as much as they do, surely the quality would be better than this. I don't know, I guess I'm just used to resin prints these days. On the upside, the primer's now really showing how nice that model actually is. The positive thing about the print is that Tom Rolt has massive flat tanks, which means sanding a surface smooth was an easy job. Another coat of primer and you can see the difference that has made. The tanks are now silky smooth, and actually disguise the fact that it's a 3D print at all. I'll glue the smokebox door on for now, and I've only just noticed that it doesn't include a dart on the front, so that's something I'll need to make later on. I'll proceed with the top coat. This, like the grey primer below it, is a particular paint that I've used on every Talyllyn model that I've been making during the last 4 to 5 years, and that's in 4mm, 5.5mm, 7mm and 16mm. Why am I mentioning that, you ask? I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to build up a confidence report for something that's about to happen. We'll see. Moving down onto the wheels, and yes, these could have been painted while still all coupled together, but it's such a quick job to remove the crank pins that you might as well, and then you get an easier job painting it. If you see me on social media asking if anyone has a replacement because I've lost one, I found it again. But the point is, make sure you're keeping these things in a safe place while you work on the model. I could then hand paint the wheel faces in the same green as the body. It's quite a thick enamel, so it doesn't really need a primer, especially that I won't be touching the wheels that much once the model's done. The pony wheel needs to be modified to fit on, so this comes in the form of pulling the wheels off the axle and grinding back the pinpoint ends smooth so they sit flush with the face of the wheel. The Dremel is obviously the best tool for this, and if you don't own a Dremel, well, go get one. I use mine in almost every job I do in the modelling room now. To paint the pony wheels, I've stuck them down onto some masking tape to hold them steady, and I've just dabbed the paint over them. Like I even need to explain how to paint. And then the death of Tom Rolt 1. I noticed that the model's cab was looking off. And after stripping the paintwork off to inspect it further, it became clear that the tanks were sagging as well. I'm unsure why this has happened, but the print is so soft, you can actually bend the cab in on itself without it snapping. I've used this type of plastic for prints before and I've had no issue, so I really don't know why it was so soft. Either way, Shapeways happily sent out a replacement. Enter Tom Rolt 2. This one seemed better, but it was still not as brittle as I would expect. Anyway, the process was repeated again and the paint was applied. And then the death of Tom Rolt 2. This time the tank sagged again, but not only that, the sides blew out. At this point I was baffled. I cleaned the model beforehand with white spirit, and I'd used the same primer and paint as I'd used in the past, and still the model was sagging. I've not worked out what the issue was, so if you've had the same thing or got suggestions, please do comment below and let me know. So I was back onto Shapeways and they sent out a second replacement. Honestly, I couldn't praise them highly enough for the support they gave me through this, and the only suggestion was that the model was too thin, but I'm not sure. Hopefully you'll understand why this build video didn't feature on the channel earlier when I mentioned it about a month ago, because now we're on to Tom Rolt 3. And this time I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. The model was washed in white spirit twice this time, and then left on a windowsill to cure further in daylight for a couple of weeks. This time the model felt stiff, so I felt happy to continue. So after spraying the top coat and giving it a few days to harden, I began masking the panels for spraying the black. I actually hand paint the black borders around TR lining, but because Tom Rolt has so much black on top, I wanted a nice tidy finish to start with. I also mask off the dome on top, which needs to stay green. As it's nearly impossible to mask it purely with tape, I used Maskol along the bottom of the dome. You can literally just paint this stuff on and work around complex shapes. It needs to dry before you paint though. And don't expect to use that paintbrush again. The black is then airbrushed on. This is a black primer, and I've adopted this particular paint for these jobs as it's got a great coverage and keys really well to any surface it's on. And then on to lining. To help the decals adhere to the model, I first applied a coat of Decal Fix. This stuff works so much better than just water alone, and is, again, one of those tools in my arsenal that I don't know how I coped before buying it. Whilst I was doing this, I had cut out the pieces of lining and soaked them in water. After a minute or two, they'll lift away from their backing paper, then they can be picked up and placed on a Decal Fix covered panel. Being water slide, they're able to move freely until you dry the surface. So take this time to make any adjustments to the lining to make sure they're nicely positioned. Sometimes the lining decal has a slight curve to it, so if this happens, I try to position one end right, and then use a cotton bud to set it in place. Then I move down the decal and force the rest into place and set that separately. Fox transfers don't appear to have any corners that will suit this style of decal, so I need to make my own. This is done by layering paint. The first layer is the yellow, and that will be the only part of the decal that you'll actually see by the end, so just make a little blob with the curve that suits the prototype. I tend to go round and do it all in one go whilst the paint's out. Doing it this way means you can also adjust them if one or two look too large or too small compared to the others around it. Then, using the black primer, I fill in the middle of the yellowish blob, which leaves, hopefully, a very fine yellow curve similar to the thickness of the lining decal. This is really delicate work, so I suggest not trying it with a 2-year-old on your lap. When I've painted in the corner, I follow the lining around the panel. The idea here is that you're painting the black around the second unneeded yellow line. I've gone around and painted the black on all the panels, and it's suddenly looking very TR, which is good. The next decal to go on is the TR crest. This is from my collection of End and Valley custom decals. I had a couple of spare crests as I won't be modelling every single coach. Well, I don't intend to, but it could happen. The model then gets a coat of varnish to seal it all in preparation for the next step. I needed to mask off the whole of the model to spray on the buffer beams, and without a coat of varnish the masking tape would have definitely pulled up all that lovely lining clean off the body, leaving shame on my family. As they're going to be red, it makes sense to first give the buffer beams a coat of red oxide primer. I can then spray on the top coat. In this case it's Humbrol 220. And yes, that is the same red as on the coaches in case you didn't spot that. It's a very nice red. With the masking off, I can now move on to hand painting the details. And this starts with the buffers. I used to paint this sort of part with a different acrylic black, but after noticing that a satin varnish coat makes them all virtually indistinguishable from the black primer, I just do it with that. One detail that's not included on the print are the whistles. So I've got these 4mm brass jobbies that look somewhat similar to number 7's pair. I've made a little support from a piece of scrap plasticard and drilled holes through it, and fitted the whistles through that. The size looks about right, so I'll keep going, and add a little bit of piping below. It's not perfect, but definitely looks okay from a few miles away, which coincidentally is the distance I like to keep other humans, so that's all good. The whistles are then sprayed on with black. The piece can then be glued onto the model with a rather too large blob of superglue. And the whistles are then painted back into brass. Doing this also ensures that the brass matches across all models. And whilst that brass paint was out, I went about the spectacle plates. Yeah, not really much else to say on that one. Then it was time to grit my teeth and paint the interior of the cab. I've started to paint a white base coat before applying the cream, as the cream takes so long to cover. Sure, it will still need at least 3 coats overall, but that's less than before. In fact, you can see how quickly the white starts to cover, and then with a cream coat on top it gives it all a tint. The next handmade detail is handrails. The model did come with somewhat pre-drilled holes, and at least that'll make all the handrails consistent in size. The handrails themselves are being made up from some scrap wire, and they can get dipped in superglue and slotted into the holes. After about 10 minutes the glue is completely set, so I can paint them black. The model also lacks any piping, so I've made some of that up as well. I have no idea what that piece is on the front, but it was in the scrap metal box and it looked like something, so I put it on. If I'd planned better, I would have drilled holes in the front of the cab for this, but I didn't, so there we go. Oh, and I have a Westinghouse air pump. This was a spare from a previous build, so that was lucky, though I believe Westcliff Works can provide some if you need them. I do some planning for these builds, and this came in a form of ordering plates from light railway stores a few months back. They do take some time to get them made up and sent over, so pre-ordering is essential. The plates are brass and black on number 7, so it's just a case of filling them with black primer. The job doesn't need to be that neat, but it does need to cover all the etched layer. So I put it on quite thick. And remember, it's acrylic, so it will dry thinner than how it looks now. Whilst those are drying, I did 2 things. Firstly, I made a fairly crude smokebox dart from some spare wire, which wasn't ideal, but I couldn't find an actual piece that looks okay. The second was paint the smokebox door bracket silver. And by the time that was done, the plates were dry, and I could sand back the tops to remove the black. Doing this with actual sandpaper is too extreme for these plates, and you'll risk sanding back the bare metal. So I rubbed them on the workbench mat. This is just enough to remove the black acrylic. And I just keep going, applying more pressure to the stubborn areas where the paint won't come away. They're ready to go on the model, and I used to use superglue to attach them, but due to the frosting that can cause, and the fact that it can set too quickly in the wrong place, I used glue and glaze. PVA would have worked fine, I guess, but I had this to hand, so that was that. This means I can move the plates until they're in the correct location. The model was then given one final coat of satin varnish, which will give everything a consistent finish. Oh, and I didn't film it, but at this point I put in window glazing. Going over to the chassis, and I've begun to reassemble it. The pony wheel is in the truck, and that was put in the place of Percy's rear coupling. It didn't have much side-to-side movement, so I cut a bit away from the truck to allow the loco to pass through the point work. The next bit would be the cylinder block. This will need the slide bars made for it out of spare wire. But first I'll reassemble the coupling rods. The body then gets pushed onto the chassis for the final time. This doesn't require any sort of screw or anything like that because it's such a tight fit. It took a few attempts to get it to push down onto it. The last few details come in the form of modelling products. The first of those are lamps. These are a simple job to paint up, just a quick coat of primer, few coats of white or black or whatever colours needed, and then the lens is glued onto the front. These then get a drop of superglue on the bottom and they're stuck to the model. Before it gets to a crew, I need to weather it down a peg. Like you need to be told at this point, but for good practice, this is a poster paint black wash. And the paint's added neat over the entire model. Before it dries, the wash is washed off with fresh water. I'm trying to get the paintwork pretty clean on this one, with the top of the boiler, the rooftop and the buffers staying more dirty. With a few hours past now, the wash is dry and the loco is coaled up. I've added a drop of PVA to the bunker top, and I'm adding coal bit by bit, only because I like to hand pick the smaller, more scale pieces. The final detail are the figures. Again, they're modelling, and you'll notice that I've painted up 3 here. That's because number 6 Douglas only has me as a fireman on it and no driver. So I'll pick the 2 that suit number 7 best here and the other one can go there. Like this bad boy. Hand up fiddling with an injector, no doubt. Like the lamps, these need a drop of superglue on the feet, and they take their place for eternity. Right, that's that then. Number 7 Tom Rolt up and ready to rock and roll on Mount Gwernal. This build was a real whirlwind, with a few false starts with faulty products, a lot of late nights to make up for lost time, but I must say I'm a real fan of this one. I know the number 7 is a Marmite type of engine in real life, but I love it. It's a proper Talyllyn engine, because they built it. And in model form, it's probably the most uncommon to see on a layout. It's also the last steam engine I'll be doing for a while here, as I'm waiting for a replacement body for number 1, I'm waiting for Bachmann to make number 3, and I'm waiting for the Talyllyn to show me number 4 in its new livery. I haven't got any diesels yet though. That's something to investigate. Cheers.